I'm Nathan Nye. I work on space vehicles at a company called True Anomaly, which is an aerospace company out of Colorado. In short, what we do has been described as like dogfighting satellites in space. If that sounds cool or interesting to you, just come to talk to me after. I've practiced security for about 20 years. I've also identified and submitted some high severity vulnerabilities in many companies. I have several of these companies listed over here.
And yeah, I'm Philippe Teuwen. I'm a security researcher at Ledger, and I'm also running the hardware CTF at hardwear.io since quite a while. And sometimes I have the stupid idea to also give a talk at hardwear.io once again. And I'll mention the two past talks that I gave because it's relevant for our talk here. One was about revealing vulnerabilities in the very last Mifare Classic version done by Fudan, a Chinese company. And I showed how to break them, and also I revealed that there was a backdoor in these cards. Another talk, a bit older, that I did with Iceman, was about EEPROM tiering techniques, something that we will use also here, and that could defeat a number of security features in various RFID attacks.
So there's a neat coincidence here. Phil and I were independently researching the same cards at almost the same periods. We independently made attacks for them in isolation, but my results weren't nearly as good as his. But that's how we met. We met in the RFID by Iceman Discord. And since then, we've collaborated on the research that we're bringing to you today. Yep. So after Mifare Classic security was defeated once again, all the integrators finally understood that they had to walk away from Mifare Classic. But the question became, what would replace it?
And the answer is the Ultralight family. So it's another class of memory tags made by NXP. Memory means that you have a number of pages usable by the user to store data in 4 byte by 4 byte pages. And over the year, they did some improvements. For example, the Ultralight C came where you could have a mutual authentication between the card and the reader based on 3Des. And later, there was an Ultralight AES version replacing the 3Des by an AES 128. There is also another branch in that family, which are more like NFC compatible tags, which means you can scan them with your phone, get a URL, and visit the website, something like that. And the last version, they added this DNA stuff, which means that they are also cryptographically signing the URL that they give you, because the URL can be also dynamic, like with a counter and things like that. And in this talk, we will cover, of course, the most interesting ones, all the ones with fancy crypto, like AES and 3Des. Yes. Starting with the Ultralight C.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Mifare Ultralight C. So the first thing we need to understand is a bit about how the mutual authentication works. After the anti-collision phase, it's like the UID of the card. The reader tells the card that it wants to authenticate, and the card makes a random challenge and encrypts it. The reader does this rotation operation before encrypting it, and then sending it back with its own challenge. At this point, the reader proves that it knows the key. But the mutual authentication isn't complete until both parties prove that they know the key, which is what the card does to complete the 3-pass mutual authentication. And after the authentication phase, the communication is clear text without any confidentiality or integrity. And while plain text communication is a significant risk, it's actually a design choice for NXP. It's a deliberate choice so that they can keep the card affordable. All the same, we want to be in that plain text channel to send commands to the card. So we exploit this scheme with a relay attack. So to perform the relay attack, we first collect a challenge from the card, and the reader calculates its mutual authentication response, which it sends back to the card. But in fact, it's sending it to our relay device. That relay device disappears from the reader, and it never finishes the 3-pass authentication. So it takes the reader's response, and it sends it back to the card. And that assumes the reader's role in the plain text channel. So now that you've authenticated with the card, you can manipulate any data that the actual reader can modify. Part of the data is the configuration of the card, and that decides whether or not you can write to it without authenticating. To make the rest of the attacks a little bit easier for us, we update that configuration value to unlock the card. So we have a demo. Right, so this is a demonstration of it. First, we show that the card is locked. There was 10 out of 48 pages unlocked. And then we have a second device that performs a relay over sub-gigahertz. So it will first transmit that challenge from the card to the second device that's at the door, which will collect the reader's response to the challenge, sends it back to the card, and we've authenticated with the card, and we've unlocked it because this has been running in unlock mode. It'll read again, and then we'll see 44 out of 48 pages read. The card is unlocked.
So actually, the relay...
You haven't seen anything yet. OK.
Yeah. That's just the first one. So for the relay here, it's over radio. So we've always this problem that we have to be in close range, and we have to be careful about the timing and things like that. But actually here in that protocol, for the purpose that we have, that is unlocking the card, we don't really care about timings. And I did an experiment at home. I took a card on my Proxmark, query for the nonce of the tag, and then program another Proxmark with that tag hard-coded, walking down the street to a hotel, then going with the second Proxmark to the hotel to get the response of the reader corresponding to the nonce that I got, and then I walk back at home, could copy-paste the response from the reader in my first Proxmark, and boom, that works. So we don't really need any real-time relay in this case because the card has no timeout. It just waits forever for the next command of the reader, which is way easier. So we will show how to recover the key as well in some situation, but only when the same key is shared across multiple tags. So for that, we first need to know is it a common key used in several tags, or is it diversified key? So for that, we can also reuse the same relay setup, but this time we will just change one information in the relay, is the UID of the card. So the real card says something, and when we go to the reader, we pretend to be a card with another ID. And then we check if the response from the reader works on the card. If it works, that means the reader used the same key. If it's not, then that means the keys are diversified. So now let's break the keys.
Right. So I do want to call out here that traditional brute force is out of the question for these cards. There are, let's see here, 5 decillion possible keys. So we have to come up with a different strategy. On Ultralight C, the key is stored on 4 32-bit pages. And the entire Ultralight's memory is made up of pages of 4 bytes. The datasheet tells you that you have to update 4 of these pages all at once, but there's actually no rule. It's not atomic. So all writes to the key pages are effective immediately. So on the first card, we end up erasing 3 of these key pages, so 3/4 of the key are erased. And then we can brute force, an online brute force, against the remaining quarter. So from 112 bits of the triple DES key, we're left with only 28 bits remaining, or about 268 million possible keys. And that's what's called a partial key overwrite attack. It's been done against some different technology, and we've reapplied it here. So then we do the same against 3 other cards to recover the 4 total parts of the key, and we can reassemble it. Still, these are each online brute force attacks, and each are trying keys to the card, and that could take quite some time. So let's see how we can optimize the brute force. Right, so there are several things that the reader typically looks for that we can just skip altogether. For instance, usually the reader has to turn on and off the RF field, to wake the card up between authentication attempts. Ultralight C cards, you could just send WUPA, it resets the card, and you don't have to cycle the field or anything. And we can also send a special command that just reads one memory page, and it skips selecting the card entirely. So we just go straight into the active state. It's waiting, ready for authentication. And for checking to see whether or not the authentication was successful, we could just look to see whether or not it sends back this like a couple bit like NAC, or if it sends like a longer response, which means that it's completed the mutual authentication. So with these optimizations, we managed to test around 100 keys per second. And if we brute force 4 cards on 4 different readers, it would take an average of around 25 days to recover the triple DES key. But why should we brute force different cards online when the door reader authenticates and gives us a challenge response pair for the card? So we could simply brute force that once we already have 75% of the key, or even as low as like half of the key. That way we only have to attack as few as 2 cards with the online brute force attack. So here there's also some tricks to optimize that phase. The 112 triple-bit triple DES key is in fact a pair of 2 56-bit keys. So if we recovered the first key, we can actually pre-compute the first third of that triple DES procedure. So as for the brute force, we don't care about whether the reader nonce. Thanks to the structure of CBC encryption, we actually don't need to decrypt it. We can decrypt the second half directly. And at this point, the initial brute force that originally required 9 DES operations, we can lower that to 4. And that's 55% less work to do. And that lowers the requirements of that 2-card attack that much further. So we actually didn't gain much in terms of online time. It's still around 21 days. But we brought down the requirements of the offline brute force to 2 cards. If we have more cards, we can see how it's possible to go much faster.
And that's where the EEPROM tiering enters in the room. So just a brief recap of how an EEPROM is working. A bit is stored like in a regular transistor, and then there is an extra gate, that's the blue part that you see there on the slide, where actually it's a floating gate. And you can force injecting electrons that will be trapped in this floating gate, and the transistor behavior characteristic will change a little bit, depends if the electrons are there present or not. And that's how you store a 0 or a 1. And when you want to write something in a page, typically you have to erase the full page first, and then you write just the ones that you want for the value you want to store. If we tier that operation, if we interrupt it, for example, during the erasure, actually the electrons are like sucked out of this floating gate, and we interrupt that at any moment we want. And depending on the moment we do that, the actual level of electrons trapped will be somewhere in the middle. And then you have the reader phase that takes a decision based on what it measures, and it will decide and tell you, yeah, this is a 1 or this is 0. But if you're very close to the limit, you can have strange stuff like that, and then some bit flips occurring, not on all the bits at the same time, but some are erasing a little bit faster than others, just because of the manufacturing process. So how can we use that fact for our PKO attack? Well, we can still erase 3/4 of the key, and the 4th quarter, we also almost erase it. We just leave a few bits on that key. So we are ending up with a key with a very low Hamming weight, so very easy to crack online, because there will be only very few candidates left. Of course, we get only a few bits of the key out of that card, so we have to then take many cards to recover enough bits to reconstruct the full triple DES key. Sorry. And for example, on average, if you get 56 cards, you can get the full key in about 1 hour. 56 looks quite a lot, but if you're like in transportation systems, metro cards or whatever, it still looks quite doable. Another topic now is that when we were testing all the cards we could get from hotels and festivals and stuff like that, we encountered some cards which were behaving a bit strange. When I say strange, it means that, for example, when you send a wrong command, you expect a type of error and maybe you get another type of error. Or sometimes some are getting a reply at a different timing than the official cards. So we were like, what are these cards? We need to identify them. So one way is to decap the chip, look at it, try to find some indication on the chip, and that's the first one that we looked at. Here you see some numbers on the chip, but typically these numbers, if you Google for that, you won't find anything. Well, today you find your paper, but at the time we couldn't find anything. But still there is this J logo. So we look online and it corresponds to the Giantec company in China. So we ordered their cards. We looked in their catalog if they had cards claiming to be Ultralight C compatible, or at least claiming some triple DES support somehow. We got them. We also decapped them so we can compare the chip, and indeed it was the correct one. So we could identify our unknown strange card, and this was this Giantec with the reference. Other cards were also behaving a bit strange. Again, same thing, we look at it, but there, no indication at all. Still, there are also like magic cards in the domain of RFID that probably known by most of people playing with this kind of stuff, where you can program the card a bit the way you want, like choosing your own UID and choosing the card such that it can mimic NTAG or Ultralight C or Ultralight EV1 or whatever you want. And we also decapped these chips, and actually they are very alike the unknown ones. So it's not exactly the same chip. You can see some X and H in the middle, for example. Still really no manufacturer name over there, but at least we can characterize them with the magic name, and they are referred as USCUID well in the RFID community. Then we looked online for yet other type of compatible cards, if any. If you look for ULC compatible, you won't find anything because they don't want to claim to be directly counterfeit of the official cards. But if you look for a card that supports the standard ISO 143A, and you look for like triple DES keyword somewhere in the datasheet, you can find some more. And for one of them that we found, we could order samples. And indeed, they were Ultralight C compatible. But we didn't find them in any hotel at that point. We look at it because maybe that was the same chip we were looking for, but they were a third type of chips. And that's the Feiju FG8010. So now that we've all the non-genuine cards to play with, these three types, we quickly saw that there were easily collisions of the nonces from the card. So we investigated a bit more, and
yeah. So there has been some prior research on Ultralight C, and they've analyzed the PRNG and they've determined it to be sufficiently random. When we were analyzing the PRNGs on the cards, we kept seeing these nonces that looked predictable, and we saw that they were repeating. And upon closer inspection of their random number generators, we found out that they were all using 16-bit LFSRs to produce 64 bits. And one of them was from an earlier broken card, Mifare Classic. So it's not good. And once you have a quarter of the nonce, you know what the other 3/4 will be. And moreover, the initial value is fixed, so that the value you query from the card depends entirely on timing. That means if you query the card with the same timings, you get nonce collisions very fast. Here in this graph, we repeatedly power a card, we get and decrypt its nonce, and we plot the index of the nonce in the LFSR from 0 to 65,000. With proper initialization of the LFSR, this graph should be completely flat. Because of these collisions, we can unlock the card without needing a full relay. What that looks like is we get a whole bunch of challenges from the card, and we look for its most common challenge. Then we go to the reader with that nonce, and we collect the reader's response, its reply. And then we once again talk to the card, repeatedly asking for challenges until it reuses the common one that we've seen. We use that common response to authenticate to the card. And we have a demo. Right. So here we're interacting with the card, just proving once again that it is locked. 10 out of 48 pages is readable. And we have our app here that's designed to interact with these cards. It's looking for that common challenge, that common nonce response from the card. And then it takes that common challenge, goes to the reader with it, and we collect the reader's response to it. And then we bring it back to the card, and we use the reader's response to unlock the card. One device, not two. Then we read the card once again to demonstrate that now it is unlocked. Right. So, yep, there we go. So because of these LFSRs, we're able to do better attacks. Once we get an encrypted nonce, we can try to decrypt it and see if the nonce is an output of one of the LFSRs that we had previously derived. So let's do our PKO attack, but this time we'll do it against a single card. Our strategy is to collect encrypted nonces that, while we progressively erase the key. And then we brute force quarter by quarter in reverse. Because this can be done with a single card, it doesn't matter whether the system is even using a KDF. We have a brute force demo of this. It takes about 30 to 45 seconds, but last week on the RFID hacking Discord, a member of the server, Connor, proposed to port the brute force to GPU. Because it's insanely fast, we have to once again summarize what's happening before showing it. So first we test the card to see if it's vulnerable by collecting that common challenge. Then we perform the partial key overwrite, PKO. Then we brute force the challenges collected during PKO in reverse. And then finally we write back the key. All right.
Yeah. So we need a vulnerable card, but we're lucky. We can use the one of a hotel very nearby from here. Let's put it on the reader. OK, we run the script. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Done.
That's it. Yep. All right. So just how common are these counterfeit cards, besides the nearby hotel? So we sampled more than 70 cards, and 1/3 of our samples were not genuine NXP cards. In fact, we brought some Feiju samples to our talk because we had never encountered them in hotels until today. Yeah, so yeah, we felt it was necessary to also include this attack as well in our talk because since the announcement of our research, vendors have been determining that KDFs are an effective mitigation on their own. This is inaccurate. One of the concepts in our research is we uncovered attacks that I like to call credential forgery attacks. And when the data on the card is not tied to the UID, it's like the serial number of the card, for instance, like using the UID as like an IV for encryption of the data on the card, one UID and key pair is all you need to make a virtually unlimited number of cards, valid cards. So all you need is a single valid key. Therefore, if you have multiple cards, and if you have some means of procuring the readers, like eBay realistically, we've seen in some transportation systems, readers have been physically ripped off of the walls. If you have the resources, those resources, you can execute a many one-card attack to recover a single KDF-generated key. So the basis of this attack is that proper KDFs have this uniform distribution across their key space if they're properly implemented. Improper ones are just much easier to attack. We're just not going to consider those. So assuming that we have this uniform distribution, we can distribute the online brute force across many readers in individually KDF diversified cards. And we do this by repeatedly overwriting that 44, like page 44, the first key page, around 2 to the 28 divided by 2 times on average, and authenticate with the reader. Once it authenticates successfully, like that's the success condition. The earliest card that returns a successful authentication can then be used for the remaining attacks. So the slowest part of this many one-card attack is the online brute force using the reader. And then we can do the individual 2 to the 28 online brute force against the card, which takes about 15 days on average. And then finally, we perform an offline 2 to the 56 GPU attack. It spans around 6 hours. It costs about $120, but that leaves us with the single UID and key pair necessary for those credential forgery attacks.
Yeah, and now we will cover Ultralight AES. So what are the differences with the 3Des or the Ultralight C? Now, of course, it's AES, so that means also that the key is slightly longer than the 3Des key. And there are a few optional extra security features, like you can enable session integrity, which means that you will have CMAC added to all the messages which are exchanged. And you have also a counter for failures of authentication attempts which failed. So you cannot really brute force the card if this feature is enabled. Still, so same thing, Keyspace for AES, it's a big number. If we do the PKO, we can leave it down to 2 to the 32 per page instead of to the 28 that we had for the 3Des. So that means it's a bit slower here, plus the messages are a bit longer in the communication. So at the end, the brute force is like 18 times slower than the one that we showed on the Ultralight C. Can we use tiering on them to make it faster, as we showed on the Ultralight C? Well, the problem is that here there is something a bit strange. Normally, if you tier after the eraser phase, you end up with an EEPROM containing zeros, and your key is 0. But here, in this case, when we do that, we end up with an unknown key, which is not the key equals 0. So we find it a bit strange. We're trying to understand what's going on. So let's start from a key that we know. So we like the key equals 0. And we tier it very little to modify a little bit the erasing a few bits in the EEPROM. And then we try to brute force what is the new key. Starting from the 0, there should have been a few bit flips somewhere, so we can recover a new key. When we manage to do that, we continue. We tier still a little bit the memory, so we erase some more bit internally, and then again, we try to find what is the next key. And if we do that over and over, all over the 4 pages, we end up with like a 128-bit long key that can unlock the card when all the pages are internally erased, where the EEPROM is equal 0. So the key that we obtain in that case is actually the mask that protects the key when it's stored on your card. So for example, when we erased that key in the EEPROM contains 0. And 0 is actually this mask value stored by itself. So the key that is used to unlock such a card is the mask value itself. Now, if the key that you want to write normally on the card to configure it is the 0, the EEPROM doesn't contain the 0, it contains the 0 XOR the mask. So it contains the actual mask value. I hope this is clear. Okay, we can recover the mask from a card. That's good. But we destroyed the original key. And we overwrite it with zeros at first. So how can we break the key itself? Here it looks a bit impossible. But I skipped that on the other side, sorry, but actually AES has 2 keys, one like the Ultralight C to unlock the data of the user, but there is another one when you are using a privacy mode, random UIDs, you have to know what is the real UID of the card. And there is a second key which is used just to get the real ID of the card, and then use it with the first key to unlock the actual data on the card. If we tier the second key and we look at the mask of the second key, actually we get the same mask value. So now we have two keys in the same card which are protected with this very same mask. And by the way, that mask is different for every card. So now that we have that, we are in better position to break the key, because we can sacrifice one key to get the mask, and then once we know the mask, we can do the usual attack on the other key. We can recover, again, just a few bits from a card. Here, the key is a bit longer. You can think, OK, I still need even more cards than previously. But we only presented the very basic tiering approach in the Ultralight C. There are still some more tricks related with the EEPROM tiering that we can play with to revive actually more bits than the one that we initially brute force. We will not cover all this optimization, but sometimes they involve funny things like hitting physically the card will revive somehow erased bit. It doesn't really revive them, it's just change the way the reader will probe the transistor, and it will think, if it's half full, it will think it's a 1 rather than a 0, for example. So all in all, with that, we can recover up to almost 7 bits per page. But some of the optimization are like probabilistic. So there's still, this time, some chance that we have a wrong guess on a bit. So we have to take it into account when we group all the bits from all the cards and try to figure out the full correct key. So our result with this is that with 20 cards and 2 hours of time on one reader, we can recover a full AES 128 bits from a Ultralight AES. Before going to the NTAG, we will also show yet another trick for the relay sites. And we will show how, with a single device, we can still unlock an Ultralight C and Ultralight AES, regular ones. We don't need these counterfeit ones and abusing the LFSR. It works on any card, including the AES one. So how that works, this time we will take, typically here we are using a Proxmark in the standalone mode. We take that device close to the card and we put it in sniffing mode. So it's not a reader, it's just observing what's going on the field. We bring both of them nearby a reader that knows the key. We wait for this usual authentication to happen. And as soon as we see that the card sends the reply to the reader, we know the card is in an authenticated state. At that point, immediately we turn on our own reader from the Proxmark. And that one is very close to the card, very strong. So actually, it overcomes completely the one of the other reader. If the reader tries to talk to our card, it will become just noise for the card, and the card will never reply. At that moment, we have still a little problem, is that if we try to send ourselves a command to the card, it will also be noise because of the other reader. But that's fine, we're still powering the card ourselves at this point. So we can just walk away from the reader and then send our command, and at that point, it will work. So let's show it in a little video, again in a very nearby hotel. First, we are showing you that indeed the pages are locked. It's all XXX in the dump here on the phone. Then we bring the Proxmark close to the card, sniffing mode, going close to the reader, and then we activate the sending of the unlock command to the card. At this point, it's already done. Let's check on the phone, and indeed, we get the full memory dump. OK, NTAGs.
Yep. So these cards are used for things like product authentication and tamper detection. They're NFC compatible. You can scan them with your phone, and they dynamically construct content with a feature called ASCII mirroring. For example, the parameters of this URL could be generated by the tag, including the tag UID, and a counter, and the CMAC. This provides a cryptographic signature. So you can't change these parameters without the AES 128 key, which is called the Sun CMAC key. You still need to unlock the tag first to be able to overwrite the Sun CMAC key. So we can apply our classic partial key override attack. But unlike Ultralight AES, where we are collecting encrypted random challenges, this time all the brute force can be done offline using the collected known plain text Sun messages and their corresponding CMACs. So we use the CMACs to break the key. This takes about 2.5 hours, and it works on a single card. It doesn't matter if the keys are diversified or not. Can we improve on that with tearing?
So if you remember the history of the cards, the NTAG DNA came at about the same time as the Ultralight AES, and actually they're sharing the same IC. And when we try to do tearing, then we see that the key is also masked, the same way it's masked on the Ultralight AES. The problem is that on the NTAG 223, and we could only get sample of that one and not the other one, we have only one key, that's the Sun CMAC key. So we cannot sacrifice another key to get that mask. Are we done? Well, there is still a trick we can do because the CMACs that we are collecting, we can use them later to break the key. We don't need like live authentication like for the Ultralight C or the Ultralight AES. So how we do that? We start from the unknown key, that's the U that you see there. We tier very progressively that key, and we're collecting CMACs, or we're collecting just the URLs that we read from the tag, which are signed. And they are signed with a key which is slightly modified from the unknown key back to the unknown mask. Then we overwrite the full key ourselves with like zeros, and we start it over. But this time, we are changing the key from the 0 to the unknown mask. That's the online phase. Once we did that online phase, we can crack all these CMACs offline by going backwards. So from the key that we know, that's a 0 key, we're trying to see what was the modified key, slightly modified key that signs the message, the next message, based on the CMAC we collected. And then we can go back and back and back up to the mask key. Once we get the mask key, we can get the first collection back and working back from the mask key up to the real unknown key that we had at the beginning. That looks like a lot of steps and a lot of tiering operations, but in reality, we can recover the full key of a single card in about 38 seconds. So let's try it here. We need to go up. Yeah, so let's put here an NTAG 223 DNA on it with an unknown key. I'll run the script. And here you see it's steering progressively from the unknown to the mask. And if you don't tier enough, you just get the same CMAC over and over. So every time you see a dot here, that's when the CMAC changed. So at that point, we record it and we continue tiering it. And we do that page per page until it's done. Then we write our 0 key, and we do that operation again on it. So the online phase here will take about 30 seconds. Oh, it's done. And now we have the offline phase, which here took about 4.5 seconds. And at the end, we got the mask key, we got the Sun CMAC C key, and yeah, even less than the 38 seconds in this run. Oh, sorry, I have to finish the run.
So here's a recap summary of how long you should expect these attacks to take. You can clearly see some of the higher risk scenarios, as we've demonstrated, like the non-genuine cards, as well as the scenarios where an attacker can procure many cards. So they might need more time in some of these scenarios, but the higher risk scenarios are toward the bottom of this bar graph. And here are the mitigations for the attacks. The biggest one is to permanently lock the key pages. It is now mandatory according to the latest NXP datasheet. You also want to review your supply chain to check for counterfeits with our tools. For instance, with the Proxmark, you can run like HF MFU info, and it will fingerprint the card for you, and it'll detect whether or not it's counterfeit. Enabling SegMessage ACT is also a useful mitigation for Ultralight AES products. Ultimately, every Ultralight C system we examined was vulnerable to one or more attacks, so these mitigations must be applied. Right, so here are some resources for our attacks. We have our paper. We have frequently asked questions on our website, so you could visit it and you could get answers for questions like, should I be concerned about my room key? Am I affected? What should my mitigation or upgrade path look like? So give it a look if you're aiming to understand whether or not your property is vulnerable. And lastly, we would like to truly thank everyone who had been a part of this research.